finish it and then reply.
They expressed their will by their extraordinary participation in a protest movement that began in the late 1950s and didn't end until the 1960s. Intellectuals were not in that protest movement.
You want me to answer or you want to keep
Black people
on?
were in that protest.
You want me to answer?
I finished.
Yes.
Good. Black people have never supported, for example, affirmative action, quotas, anything of that sort. Wherever polls have been taken of black opinion on such matters of should people be paid equally or should there be this or that, black people have never taken a position that you describe. So it is not a question of what black people chose to do. It's what you choose to put in the mouths of black people. It is what you choose to project. It is not what any black people have ever said anywhere that you can put your finger on.
It's what you choose to put into the mouth of the pollsters, as far as I can see.
I
Look
put in
at
the mouth
the
of the
leadership of
pollsters.
the black community.
Like most people, I have never seen a pollster.
If you look at the leadership of the black...
But I want to go back to the... I want to carry it back to the earlier point. Number one, there's no question about what equality of results, if it comes about through a framework of freedom, is a desirable result. Number two, I argue in the film, I've argued here, that in point of fact, you get greater equality of actual results by a system under which people are free to achieve unequal results. That for the poor people of the world that Francis Fox Piven was talking about, the most effective mechanism for enabling them to improve their status is not a governmental program which seeks to ascribe to them certain positions, which seeks to provide them with certain goods and services, but a governmental program which tries to eliminate arbitrary barriers to advancement. I would say that in this world, the greatest source of inequality has been special privileges granted by government. That government, you may talk a great deal, there may be a lot of talk about how we're going to eliminate inequality. But if you look at, go back to your case of Britain, is there any doubt that one of the effects of governmental intervention in Britain has been to create new opportunities for special classes? That the way to get wealthy in a society that supposedly is aiming at equality, that the way to get wealthy is to get a special government permit to to get foreign exchange, or to import goods, or to, in this country, to set up a television station. Those are the ways in which you get inequality.
Well, I think, Milton, you grossly misrepresent the British experience, and here perhaps I might make the points. First of all, the burden of taxation in Britain is lower, and has been for many years, than in any other of the countries of the European community, the overall burden of taxation. Secondly, you will immediately come back and say, but the marginal rates of personal taxation have been extremely high. Perfectly true, but not as high as they were in the United States until the early 1960s. It's interesting to note in passing that when the United States reduced its 90% maximum personal rate to 50%, the rate of economic growth in the United States, and I'm not suggesting cause and effect, fell from the previously very low rate of 2.5% a year to about 0.4% in the period since, so that any notion that there is an absolutely one-for-one relationship between the degree of personal taxation and efficiency is wholly mythical.
Well, thirdly, I tell you, what you can do with statistics...
Well, you ought to look at the facts. It's easy to make glib remarks about statistics. Look at the facts. Look at the fact that in Britain, over the last 30 years, during which period, according to you, Britain has been crushed by egalitarianism, whereas the United States has been soaring away in a glorious state of liberty, the rate of economic growth in Britain has been faster than that in the United States. How do you explain that?
First of all, I have to look at what the figures mean in Britain. I have to look at the way in which...
First you look at them. And then...
I have looked at them, and you realize that in judging output in the government, that's judged in terms of cost, not in terms of product. And what I really ought to look at is not the rate of growth of GNP as the statisticians measure it, but the consumption available to people in forms which, as people value it, ultimate consumption. If I look at that, I get a very different picture. The statistics are very, very, as you know very well, are very easy to use. They can be used to throw light, or they can be used to cast confusion.
One should look at facts.
I agree with you.
Facts are that the amount of goods and services consumed by the government as a proportion of the national output are no higher than Britain than they are in the United States, and haven't been any time since the war.
They have risen very sharply.
Which may be the explanation of the low rate of growth in the United States.
They have risen very sharply. It has risen very sharply in the war.
In both
Since the war, in both countries.
Yes.
It is higher in Britain than it is in the United States,
Both
properly
25%
measured.
in both cases.
The proportion, excuse me, I want to take total, excuse me, that again is a statistician's nightmare.
No,
we have to look at total government spending.
You were the one who was talking about whether or not people have freedom to choose how their money is spent. The transfers, which is pensions and other payments from government, leave the freedom as to how the money is spent in the hands of private individuals. It's only the direct consumption of goods and services where the bureaucrats are making the decisions.
It leaves the decision for freedom in the hands of the recipient, but not in the hands of
I'm back in my chairman's role. Can we leave the statistical debate? Fascinating, I'm sure it is. I want to make the point, Milton. It seemed to me, and I am not British, I'm Canadian, having lived a great deal in the UK, it seems to me that you really have most unfairly used the UK as a whipping boy in the last third of your film. Because you say for much of this century the British have tried to use the law to impose equality. Now the Conservatives have been in office for 65%
I am not a partisan. I am not a partisan.
You're not. Let me finish it. There have been 3 majority left governments in Britain. And it is not the case at all that, unlike other parts of Europe, there has been consistent policies aimed at equality. Taxation is lower. There's no wealth tax. There's a wealth tax in 8 other Western European countries. Capital gains tax came in only 10, 15 years ago.
But let me take your case. First of all, conservative labor, that's not the issue. I have argued again and again. I do
but
again.
The Conservatives not pursued equality.
I do in a book which is associated with this series. I make the point that the policy of Britain in the past 60 or 70 years owes more to the philosophical idea of the Tories of the 19th century than it does to the ideas of Karl Marx. In the United States, in the 1930s, the Socialist Party never garnered more than a few % of the vote, but it was the most influential political party in America because its policies were adopted by both the Republicans and the Democrats. In the same way, what you have to look at is not whether the Conservatives or the Labor Party is in power, but what were the basic philosophy and ideas, the ideas of Fabian socialism, of Tory paternalism, were being affected by both the Tories and the Labour Party.
There will be some very surprised Tory politicians and some very surprised voters to hear what you say. But let me give you another example of the way you're playing fast and loose with the facts. You talk about crime in Britain. I mean, crime in Britain is a tiny fraction of what it is in the United States and has been throughout that period. When you say that we're so egalitarian and you're so free. You talk about able people being driven out of the country. More qualified people are living and working in Britain than at any time in the last 150 years of our history. Now, this is largely because of the granting of independence to the colonies, the loss of empire, if you like. But in fact, for example, doctors, which are endlessly talked about, more British-trained doctors are now working in Britain than at any time in our history.
It's also true that the physicians leaving Britain, emigrating from Britain, amount to one-third as many as a number of people graduating each year from your medical schools.
I think it's a mistake to...
That happens to be...
It's a distortion of the evidence to rest the argument for the free enterprise system by selectively using the example of England when you want to, the United States when you want to. The test of your argument about the free enterprise system and its capacity to produce both freedom and greater equality, to relieve poverty, the test of that argument has to be made everywhere that the free enterprise system has been extended, has penetrated. The test of your argument is not only in what happened to England and the ostensible decline or not the decline of the English economy or what happened in the United States. The test of that argument has to look at what the free enterprise system has meant for the majority of people who do not live in England and do not live in the United States, who do not live in the mother countries, but rather live in that part of the world where most people live and where most people have had their lives disrupted, peasants have lost their land, traumatic destruction.
Excuse me, you got to compare...
Because of the free enterprise system.
Excuse me, you've got to compare something with something. Will you tell me the alternative, which has improved the lot of the ordinary people? What is the system which, in your mind, has been successful? Most people, through most history, have lived in tyranny and misery. It's only a very tiny minority at any time that have been able to escape from it. That's the real beauty. That's the real achievement. Now, will you tell me what the alternative system is which has achieved?
Well,
tell me what...
Excuse me. And I say that elsewhere in the world...
What's the alternative? What's the alternative? What's your alternative?
The free enterprise system is of itself not an alternative because, as you agree, it does not exist. We are arguing really to defend those interventions which have been made by government on the behalf of people in an effort to reduce inequality, in an effort to reduce oppression.
And tell me, which of those are you defending in which of these countries where those interventions have benefited the masses? In most of the countries where you have departed from the free enterprise system, You have had a small class benefited at the expense of the masses. If you take the African countries, which have become one-party dictatorships, are you going to tell me they have benefited the masses?
I'm astounded by the examples of the third world that are brought into here. Those parts of the non-capitalist world in which the capitalist system has penetrated are typically higher income places than those parts where they haven't. Are you talking in any kind of testable hypothesis, or is it just axiomatic that it's so? Because the studies that I've seen indicate that those countries where capitalists have never gone near them are poorer than they've ever been. They were poor before the capitalists got there, they were poor while the capitalists were there, and they're poor after the capitalists have left.
Your measures of wealth are not measures of the wealth of a people. They are measures, rather, of gross national product.
Give me your measures, then.
Which reflect, as in the case of Chile, which you don't want us to discuss, which reflect the great advances that have been made by the middle classes and the upper classes in Chile as of this date, at the expense of the sharp decline in the income of working people. The Catholic Church...
Those are not the facts.
Well, I still think Milton has not told us the answer to the question, what is he saying? And it's very important we should know what he's saying. It seems to me that he should accept the fact that nobody is arguing for absolute equality and disregarding all other social and human objectives. He should accept that it is perfectly reasonable, widely endorsed, and perfectly logical for people to say, amongst other social political objectives, reducing inequality is a perfectly sensible one, and that in those cases where you can show that you can get a big gain in equality for only a very small loss in freedom or only a very small loss in efficiency, that is a sensible and legitimate thing to do, and if it involves government action by, for example, income tax or negative income tax, that is a perfectly proper and sensible thing to do. And if he's denying that, then I still say he's given us no moral or ethical arguments to explain why he is denying that perfectly proper concern with equality along with freedom, efficiency, and other human objectives.
The answer to that is that you can only serve one God. And that it's stating that there are many, many of these objectives is evading the fundamental issue. In addition to that, as an empirical matter, the attempts to achieve equality along your lines, to lessen inequality, have generally backfired. They have generally reduced freedom without, in fact...
In Germany?
Yes.
In Japan?
Yes.
In France?
Take the Japanese case, which is a marvelous case. Not now, but 1867, after the Meiji Restoration.
Right now. Hell with 1867.
Well, the reason for taking it then is because you had a far greater measure of free enterprise then than you have had more recently.
That's my point.
In almost all cases, the way to promote equality is the same as a way to promote, as an outcome, is the same as a way to promote freedom. If you promote freedom, if you remove arbitrary obstacles, you open the way for people to use their resources, you will end up, in my opinion, and I think the empirical evidence is overwhelmingly on this side, you will end up with both more freedom, more prosperity, and more equality.
You're a closet egalitarian, really, then. You
not.
Support the objective.
I would like to... There's an enormous difference between liking to see a result and being in favor of a particular method of achieving that result. Because if I were wrong, if freedom led to wider inequality, I would prefer that to a world in which I got artificial equality at the expense of freedom. My objective, my God, if you want, is freedom. The freedom of human beings, of individuals, to pursue their own values. That will also...
Well, there we leave this discussion at the University of Chicago. I hope you'll join us for another edition of Free to Choose.
Each year, billions of dollars are pumped into the education system. But how many parents are really satisfied with the schooling their children get? Teachers, children, parents, taxpayers. It sometimes seems no one is happy with our public schools. What's gone wrong, and what can be done about it? Don't miss Free to Choose next week.
Try again with more. Fire. Put the hand this time. Fire.